Welcome, everyone, to the Philanthropy Hour. It is my distinct honor to welcome to the show today Mr. Kyle Westaway. Welcome, Kyle.
Good to be here.
Kyle is a recognized figure in the field of social enterprise as both a writer, a blogger, a lecturer. He co teaches a course at Harvard Law School in social enterprise and consults on several different companies in the field of social enterprise, and has recently put out his book, Profit and Purpose: How Social Innovation is Transforming Business for Good. So I really am excited to talk about the book, talk about everything. But first, let's talk about social enterprise and what drew you into this field. How come you got into it?
Well, Greg, I sometimes you look back on life and you see stepping stones that you didn't see along the way. For me, two of those that led me to where I am today were one was in grad school and one was in law school. So I was in grad school and I was getting my master's in public policy, and my thesis was focused on economic development in sub-Saharan Africa. So I started to think about, at that point in time, how macro level systems could change the quality of life of people, ordinary people on the ground. So I got really interested in the economic side of things in grad school. And then in law school, something strange happened to me. You're supposed to go to law school and kind of become a callous jerk and somebody that nobody really likes hanging out with. But what happened to me is I went to law school and I grew a heart, which was both shocking and interesting to me. Got really interested in issues of social justice in law school. Specifically, two issues that resonated with me were extreme poverty, those living on less than $1 a day, and the commercial sex trade. Those are two issues that I thought should be relegated to history books, that they shouldn't be in our newspapers right now. So those are kind of two stepping stones that eventually led me towards social entrepreneurship.
It's a devastating topic for sure. And from
Hmm.
that, you found the intersection of social work and law, which at the
Yeah.
time and still is very much emerging. There's not many people in that space.
Yeah. So this kind of the story behind that is before or as I was launching my law firm, I was also launching a social enterprise as well. So I kind of come to this as both a social entrepreneur and as a lawyer that's interested in the sector. And so uh, going through the role of being a social entrepreneur and figuring out how to operate a social enterprise and figure out what it looks like to do that. I feel like I learned a lot of insights that I play into my law practice right now.
So let's talk about the book, Profit and Purpose. It takes a look at several successful businesses
Hmm.
in different areas too. You're talking about blue chip corporations, you're talking about startup companies, and talking about the not for profit sector, and all of them applying this model of being mission driven, purpose driven, and having the same sort of principles. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, so this book came out of actually a little bit of personal experience. The social enterprise that I mentioned did not end up, it ended up failing. It didn't end up succeeding, or at least didn't end up succeeding on the scale that we had hoped it would. Um, and then as I mentioned, I work with a lot of social entrepreneurs in my law firm, and just like in any startup sector, failure rate is pretty high. And then I teach this topic as well. So always looking for trying to figure out what does it take for social enterprise to succeed. So that's what this book is based on. Is that one question: what does success look like in the social enterprise sector? I tend to be pretty tax status agnostic. So I'm not pro nonprofit or I'm not pro for profit. I'm pro impact, and wanted to look at different organizations that are really innovative in the way that they're creating impact, and that's where kind of the journey of the book started. So what ended up happening is I sat down with 13 different leaders of organizations that I felt like were had achieved a level of success, and just chatted with them, try to understand what their journey is. So the way I like to talk about the book is it's everything you'd want to ask, hopefully everything you'd want to ask if you were sitting down for coffee with each of these founders is packed in this book. It's a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at the steps and missteps that each of these social entrepreneurs made along the way.
So it sounds like it's something that could be applied to really any sector. It's the challenges and pratfalls of getting a venture off the ground, and the hustle that's involved, in the passion that's involved in making that happen.
Absolutely, and I think there's an extra so if you talk to any entrepreneur, they will tell you a lot about the hustle that's required and the challenges of getting any startup off the ground. So there are some points in this book that are broadly applicable to any entrepreneur, but there is something a little bit unique when you're trying to not only optimize for one bottom line, which is profit, but optimizing for a second bottom line as well, which is purpose. And that purpose might be social or it might be environmental, but trying to optimize for two of those simultaneously adds an extra layer of challenge that a traditional entrepreneur may not be facing.
So let's talk about the difference between the for-profit companies and the not-for-profit. And, we can get into the legal structure later, the 501c3 versus a LLC versus a B Corp, or then this L3C, which I want to learn more about as well. But, I mean, is there really a difference in the mentality behind them? If your mission is completely on a social purpose as opposed to having a consumer product where you're also trying to make profit, but also focusing on the social purpose as well. And are they similar, or what are the challenges there?
So I think I have a hard. Well, one of the way that this book opens up is talks about the history of traditional capitalism, or what we see now as capitalism, and the history of philanthropy, and basically noting that both leave some unsatisfying outcomes. And we live in a world where it seems that there's a binary choice, a choice between doing good, and that means you're in a nonprofit structure, and that means that the thought of money is a dirty thing to think about. And then there's the idea of making money, which has to be in a corporation or a kind of hyper-capitalistic mentality, and all you care about is stock price and getting more value for your shareholders, and you don't care about the rest of the world. So we have these two dominant paradigms, profit or purpose. And the point of this is that those life. So I and my philosophy, I would say these emerging entrepreneurs, because they're tax status agnostic. So there's no past have been tied to a tax status, which seems like a very silly thing to be tied to. When I talk to somebody and ask them what they do, and the first thing they say is, I work on profit, I'm like, that is so weird for me, because I never ask somebody, what do you do? I say, I work in a C. You do, I work in an S corp. They're all legal and tax designations. I think what's interesting is, what are you doing? What impact are you creating? So, especially as millennials are coming into the work for so then seeing value and going into the idea of work, and there's a blurring of lines that's happening. Anyways, the point is that I don't think there is a difference. Very effective nonprofits look very similar to very effective for-profits. The way that I like to think about structure is really the same way that an architect thinks about a good architect thinks about building a building, which is there's not a good structure to do social enterprise in. One has to understand exactly what's happening inside of a building in order to sketch out the best building for that particular space or for that particular objective. Same thing for a social enterprise. You have to understand what's happening operationally in order to sketch out the right structure for that. So I have some nonprofits that look very much for all the world like a for-profit company, and I have some for-profit companies that look for all the world like they're just doing good. And there's different reasons for that.
And I mean, the for-profit sector for a long time has operated in a certain traditional path, and maybe in
Mm-hmm.
response to what's taking place here, what they're seeing is that they're saying, we can operate our businesses like for-profit. We can have that corporate mentality and still, achieve our mission. But
Sure.
we don't have to come from a place of starvation and want all the time. It can also be abundance and profitability.
Yeah, are you speaking for the nonprofit sector is thinking that way? Yeah, and the interesting thing too is there is some to that point. There is some honesty that the market has that the purely social sector or NGO or nonprofit sector doesn't have. So there is a level of honesty that if you're putting a product or service out onto the market and nobody cares about it or nobody wants it, you will go out of business in the for-profit world, right? So the market will tell you that you're not doing something right. You can either learn from that or not. If you don't learn, you go out of business. In the nonprofit world, you can always write that next appeal letter, that next appeal letter, that next appeal letter, and continue to stay in business even if you're not effective. In fact, the correlation between impact and dollars raised is often very decoupled. The way that many more classic, and I won't say kind of more innovative, but more classic nonprofits make their money is just by telling good stories rather than actually doing good work. So you have this bifurcation internally where you have program over here and you have development over here, and the development team keeps the lights on so that the program people can do the work that they're doing, but you tend to have a talent kind of leakage towards the development people. So you have your best and brightest going out there telling the story and raising money, and maybe your least best and brightest kind of implementing. Now that's a huge sweeping generalization. Fortunately, a lot of organizations aren't like that, and what we're seeing more and more is organizations that are tied to a real sense of understanding what impact they're creating and being able to communicate that. But kind of the more traditional classic idea of what a nonprofit is, I feel like it can be in some senses less honest than a traditional for-profit corporation.
It's an interesting point because if you're a 501c3, the way you're raising capital is you're still writing grants and asking people
Yeah.
for donations, whereas within this new structure, it's very much like any other startup company where you're raising capital through investors, through venture capital, and through profitability, revenue.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
And now you also talk about the blue chip corporations, which is,
Sure.
it's interesting. You profile Coca-Cola, IBM,
Yeah.
and some of the innovative ideas that are coming out of these companies, and Nike, and a host of other companies that are doing very beneficial things. Is this in response to what's taking place in this social enterprise field? Is this just the way the future of this country, of business in general, is heading?
That's a great question. I'm not sure that I'm smart enough to know the full answer to that, but I'll give it a shot. Okay. The I think there's a couple things happening. One is there's an understanding from the larger organizations that just providing a commodity product probably isn't going to be a winning strategy in the long term. So 20 years, 30 years from now, they're going to have to be providing value beyond just a can of Coke or a shoe, right? That the companies that will win long term are providing broader value to their customers rather than just a simple product, especially as kind of production keeps getting cheaper and more efficient, and the profit margins on those get smaller and smaller and smaller. A brand has to stand for something more. So I think it's partly driven by that. I think it's partly driven by people within the company. So that's kind of the cynical view that is very self-interested. And it's partly driven by people within the company that say, wow, we have a really powerful platform, and there are ways to create purpose without trading off profit. So there are definitely opportunities within organizations where by being purposeful it will decrease and purpose. And there are opportunities whereby seeking something purposeful actually drives more revenue, more profits. So I think what and he used to point a lot of larger companies really the idea of aligning of his opportunities where the profit and purpose align, so that you can sell that internally and say, look, we're going to do some more interesting and better for the world in whatever way, environmentally or socially, but we are going to actually see our either costs reduce or our revenues raise. Net goal of being more profitability. So a great example of this that actually isn't in the book that Nike is doing is the running shoe that I use called the Nike Flyknit, and this is a technology, an innovative technology that allows for the upper shoe to move into in a single piece. Happens with panels of so together into the technology is a lot of ways. So a huge amount of percent what they normally would have. Secondly, it's incredibly cost efficient as far as that offer you have the criminal benefits, the cost benefits, and Nike would say we don't ever do anything that doesn't benefit the athlete. So it's a lot more comfortable. That's a great example of a that has actually had a really positive impact on their bottom line and the impact the environment. So there are those wins, and it's nice to see those where they exist. I think the harder question is when there is that tension. How do you navigate that as an organization? How do you communicate the long-term value proposition of making those choices?
I've heard a lot of people talk about the new generation, the millennials, and about how they are driving a lot of this change, because as a broad generalization, the whole generation is more engaged, socially engaged, more consciously aware of what's going on, and demands that from the products they buy.
So what's the question?
So
how are millennials driving this change?
How are millennials? Let me ask that, and so I can pause it and re-ask it. So, how do you think millennials are driving this change?
Perfect. Good question. Millennials are coming into their own as far as an economic powerhouse. The amount of spending power that they have continually increases as they start to earn more. And there are more millennials now than there are boomers. So this is a big segment of the population. Their buying power is increasing. Their values are different, right? What we know about millennials is that they care, that they want to do good not only through charitable giving, which is every generation in the past has thought about, I will go to work, or I'll buy products, I'll be a consumer over here, and then over here I'll do some good by kind of writing a check to Philanthropy or doing whatever volunteering from time to time. There is an expectation or a desire in this generation that has not really fully existed before, which is, I want my purchasing power to be doing good. Now that's a pretty significant shift from past generations. So what that looks like, though, is a pretty shallow understanding of doing good. It's a pretty shallow and vague understanding. So what the statistics show is that 70% of millennials want their purchases to do some good. Only 30% will look past the high end, marketing of that good. So there's an exciting opportunity for companies to really do some good. There's also an opportunity for some companies to greenwash by a very, very long statement of actually having any follow up on. Double-edged sword, and I think I'll give a fear and a hope. Uh, Fear is that this generation will, companies will start to react by that by doing kind of very surface level good, quote unquote good. And then millennials, as they grow older, will become skeptical on whether this even matters at all. That's my fear. And my hope is that the trajectory of business, of the market, is going to realize that there is increasing value to their bottom line, to their financial bottom line, if they are taking into consideration their social and environmental bottom line. And that will continue to win market share.
Most likely, it'll probably be a little bit of both.
Yeah, probably. And I'm definitely an optimist in life in general, but I'm a pragmatist most of all. So we'll probably see both. I agree.
I mean, in the future, do you think this term social enterprise will still exist, or social entrepreneur? I mean, if everyone is committed to improving something in life, and if that becomes sort of the new norm, what's that going to look like?
Sure, great question. I mean, my goal is that the term is irrelevant 20 or 30 years from now. It's the way we do business. I think it's important to put a label on it now to differentiate a little bit from traditional business. It's important to put a label on it to get a good critical mass moving. But as with every important idea or movement, it needs to diffuse all the way through to the mainstream. And until it does, it's a nice thing to talk about, and it's great for a couple standout organizations that are able to execute on it and go to scale. But it won't be meaningful until kind of the blue chip companies really take that into more the core of how they're doing business, rather than just an ancillary kind of nice thing, corporate social responsibility idea that's not core to how they run their operations. And then I think one company that's actually not in the book, but I'm a big fan of, is Unilever. And they have really, really bold goals socially and environmentally for 2015. And they are pushing very hard to get those done. And this is a company that one out of every three people on the planet owns a product of theirs. So by shifting how they source their goods and how they distribute their goods, they can have a real big impact. So I'm excited to see initiatives like that are more core to the operations rather than a little bit of ancillary CSR on the side.
That's great. Sort of wrapping it up here, I do want to plug your own business and what you do at Westaway Law, and how you are of value to these companies.
Yeah. So I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world to be able to wake up and do really cool work with people that I think are super smart, that are creating real impact. So I count that a blessing every day. And what we do is we partner with social entrepreneurs at every stage of their growth cycle to think about how they can be more successful while they're blending profit and purpose. So what that looks like oftentimes is we kind of have a number of different touch points throughout the life cycle. From formation, how do you figure out the structure? Am I a nonprofit? Am I a for-profit? Should I think about one of these emerging new legal structures like benefit corporation or L3C or social purpose corporation? To funding, if I'm bringing in impact investing money, how do I structure that? What am I looking to do? How do I set myself up for success? All the way to kind of how you think about your employee engagement and your entire ecosystem. How do you scale up while keeping purpose core? And should you be on the for-profit side of things, what does an exit look like while you still make sure that the mission maintains going forward? So it's fun. It's fun work. It's very intellectually engaging work and fun work for us to do.
That's great. So, besides your own book, what other resources would you recommend, especially for budding social entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, I mean, there's there's a couple things. I would recommend something I do called the weekend briefing, which is essentially a synopsis of what happened this week in the social innovation world. So I kind of pick 5 stories throughout the week, summarize them, and give you links to them. And then some other kind of added bonuses in there. So if you want to stay on the pulse of what's happening on the kind of cutting edge of innovation in society, that's a great thing to look at. And you can find that at profit-purpose.com. There's a button called that's subscribe. Beyond that, some books that I'm really, really loving that are more broadly applicable, but I think I would highly recommend. One is called The Lean Startup, which is a great, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit, a great methodology for how to approach what you do to create the most impact possible. And the second book, and this is the book that just came out in 2014 that I really love, is called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And it is a really deep look at the grit and hustle that it takes to get any startup organization off the ground. It's kind of specifically written towards tech entrepreneurs, but is very applicable to anybody because those struggles are pretty broad. Lastly, if you're kind of a geek and interested in the legal side of social enterprise law, there is a site that I highly recommend called socentlaw.com. That's SOCENTLAW.com. So those are things that I personally recommend and love and can vouch for.
And I'm going to add those resources to my website. So any listeners out there, come check out the blog and you can find some of these resources and learn more about that and learn more about Kyle. So thanks again for joining us. And this is really enlightening and a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate the opportunity, Greg. And for anybody out there trying to change the world, get off the couch, make it happen, and you can actually make a real impact.
There you go. Some words of wisdom to live by.